Hello and welcome to Just a Moment. My name is Kristen Harding. Welcome to the show. Today I'm going to start a new book. It's called The Barron Trump Novels and the Last President. And it's written by a gentleman named Ingersoll Lockwood way back in 1899. So, number one, that there would be a Barron Trump in 2024, that his father would be president, and that this book was written last century. I just thought that was so intriguing. And then I was talking to some friends about it, and they had just heard of it, and I was like, but I just got that book. So I thought I'd share it with you guys. So again, it's called The Barron Trump Novels and the Last President by Ingersoll Lockwood. And I believe it was written in around 1899. And the subtitle says The Travels and Adventures of Little Baron Trump and His Wonderful Dog, Bulger. Let's call him Bulger. Okay. I haven't read this, so I am reading this to you and to myself for the very first time. So let's find out what all the hype is about. Chapter 1, a short account of one of the little baron's most celebrated ancestors, called the Armless Knight, his wonderful strength and bravery, how he followed Coeur de Lion to the Orient, his brilliant exploits on the battlefield under the walls of Joppa, his marriage in the presence of Saladin and Coeur de Lion. So I guess that's like a synopsis. So it says, I come from one of the most ancient and honorable families of North Germany, famous for its valor and love of adventure. One of my ancestors, when just entering the 20s, heard at his father's table one morning that England's great king, Coeur de Lion, was about to lead an army against the infidels. Gracious parent, cried the young man, starting up from his seat, his eyes on fire, his cheeks ablaze, may I join the Crusaders and aid in the destruction of the enemies of our holy religion? Alas, poor boy, replied his father, casting a piteous glance at the youth, who, through some strange freak of nature, had been born armless. Thou were not intended for terrible conflicts, such as await our cousin, Coeur de Lion. Thou lackest every means of wielding the battle sword, of couching the lance. 'Twould be murder to set thy defenceless body before the uplifted scimitar of the merciless Moslem. My dear son, banish such thoughts from thy mind, and turn thee to poesy and philosophy. Thou shalt add new lustre to our family. To our family, to our family name by learning. Nay, gracious parent, hear me, urged the youth with an eloquent eye. True nature has denied me arms, but she has not been so cruel as might be supposed, for as compensation she has given a giant's strength to my lower limbs. Dost not remember how last month I slew a wild boar with one blow from the heel of my hunting boar? I do, answered the grim old baron with a smile. But pardon my interruption, noble father, came the young man. I shall go into battle doubly armed. For each stirrup shall I affix a sword, and woe betide the Mussulman who dares to meet me on the battlefield. Go then, my son, cried the old baron, as tears trickled down his batter-scarred cheeks. Go join our royal cousin Coeur de Lion, and if thou, armless, canst withstand the fury of an infidel, another glory will be added to the name of Trump. And in this ancestral hall shall hang a portrait of the armless knight, upon which for all time the lovers of valiant deeds shall rest their wondering eyes. The joy of my young ancestor knew no bounds. Scarcely staying to make needful preparations for his journey, with a handful of trusty retainers, he rode from the castle yard amid the plaudits of thousands of fair women who had gathered from the neighboring city to wish Godspeed to the armless knight. 'Twas not until the famous battle under the walls of Joppa that my ancestor had an opportunity to give an exhibition of his bravery, his extraordinary strength, and the resistless fury of his onslaughts. Not one, not five, not 10 common soldiers dared face this armless knight. Whole squadrons recoiled in terror before this mysterious avenger of wrongs of the wrongs of Christendom, who without hands struck down the Moslem warriors as the grain falls before the blast. Again and again Saladin sent the flower of his men against the armless knight, whose strength and valor had already made his name a terror to the superstitious soldiery. Little realizing the terrible fate awaiting them, the Moslem warrior would rush upon my ancestor with an uplifted scimitar, when, with one blow of his sword-armed stirrup, the armless knight would cleave the beast of his foeman's horse and then trample the infidel to death as he rolled upon the ground. Wow! It was now high noon. Upon an eminence Saladin, watching the tide of battle, saw with anxious eye the appalling slaughter of the very flower of his army. Already the name, rank, and nationality of my young ancestor had been made known to the Moslem leader. La ilah Muhammad ul Bekullah. I'm not sure what I just said. My apologies for the pronunciation, he cried, stroking his beard. Blessed is the man who can call that Christian warrior his son. How many of the Prophet's children has he slain this day? 659, was the answer given. 659, echoed Saladin, and it is but noonday. When nightfall came, the number had been increased to 1007. Upon hearing of the terrible day's work of the armless knight, Saladin's great heart bled, and yet he could not withhold his admiration for such wondrous skill and bravery. Go, cried the magnanimous infidel chieftain, go take from my household that beauteous slave Kohelat, with her orbs of lustrous black, the very blossom of grace and flower of queenly beauty. Lead her to the armless knight with royal greeting from Saladin. His valor makes him my brother. I'm going to spell this Giaour. Giar, though he be, away. When the beautiful Kohelat was led into the presence of my young ancestor, and the announcement made to him that Saladin had sent her as a present to him, the armless knight, with royal greeting as a token of his respect for one so young and yet so valiant, the first thought of the Christian youth was to wave her indignity from his presence. Wave her indignantly from his presence. At that moment, however, Kohelat raised her large and lustrous eyes and fixed them full upon the man's face. It was more than the human heart could stand. Motioning her retinue to leave his tent, he advanced to her side with respectful mien and said, Kohelat, a strange fate has sent thee to me. The messenger of the great Saladin imparts to me knowledge of thy goodness, thy amiability, and thy gifted mind, which holds within its store most delightful imagery and useful knowledge as well. He informs me that thou standest in the direct line of descent from that famed princess of your land, Scheherazade, who for 1001 nights held the thoughts of the Sultan of the Indies so enthralled by the play of her brilliant fancy as to turn him aside from his terrible project of vengeance. Dost think, Kohelat, that thou canst forge thy false god, and love only the true one? Ay, my lord, murmured the gentle Kohelat, if such be thy my lord's pleasure." A smile spread over the handsome face of my young ancestor. He would fain have met with more resistance in converting the fair infidel to the true faith. But though he searched that beautiful face long and closely for any sign of subtlety, yet he saw none. "'Tis well, Koholat," he said, "and now answer me and speak from thy heart. Art thou willing to become my wife, according to the rites of the Christian Church and the laws of my native land?" Again the beautiful Koholat replied, "Ay, my lord, if such be thy pleasure." The following day a truce was proclaimed, and in the presence of the two great leaders of the opposing armies, Coeur de Lion and Saladin, both surrendered. By the most glorious retinue, my young ancestor and the Princess Koholat were joined together as man and wife by the royal confessor, the armless knight towering above the surrounding multitude. In his glittering coat of mail, like a column of burnished silver, when he advanced to meet his dark-eyed bride with the marriage ring held between his lips, a mighty shout went up from both armies. Saladin stroked his beard. Coeur de Lion made the sign of the cross. In a short half-hour the leaders had returned to their camps, and the war had resumed its awful work of destruction. To this union of my renowned ancestor the armless knight with the Moslem maid I attribute my possession of an almost oriental exuberance of fancy. We're on chapter 2 already. And the synopsis says, "The elder baron, uncertain as to the exact locality of my birth. Reasons why will be given later. My parents traveling in Africa at this time. The elder baron's remarkable ascent of the mountains of the moon, miraculous escape from the impenetrable fog. How accomplished in the land of the melodious sneezers. I'm not kidding. All that happened there. How the king of the melodious sneezers conducted my parents in great honor to his palace, and how they were treated by him." So here we go. While it lies within my power to gratify the curiosity of my readers as to what part of the world it was in which I first saw darkness, for I was born in the night, yet as to the nature of the immediate spot on which I was born, unfortunately, I am able to do more than repeat my father's words when questioned as to this point. "My son, if I were on my deathbed, I could only say that thou wert either born in the center in a great lake, on an island upon a peninsula, or on the top of a very high mountain, as I have often explained to thee. Let it suffice then, gentle reader, for the present, for me to inform you that at the time of my birth my parents were traveling in Africa, that my father had just successfully accomplished one of the most wonderful feats in mountain climbing, namely the ascent of the loftiest peak of the mountains of the moon, that his guides had abandoned him upon his reaching a particularly dangerous spot in the ascent, but that he had pushed forward without them, and reached the summit after several days of terrible privation, suffering both hunger and thirst, it being a peculiarity of the atmosphere after passing a certain height that the muscles of the face and throat became paralyzed, and the unfortunate traveler either perishes from hunger or thirst while in the very presence of delicious fruit and cool water." And that made me thirsty. I'm going to sip coffee. Upon rejoining my mother, who had accompanied him as far up the mountain side as their best trained and most sure-footed mules could find a foothold, they proceeded to make their way, as they supposed, to the valley from which they had first set out. An impenetrable fog now shut them in, and they soon found themselves helplessly and hopelessly wandering about. On the morning of the third day, the fog had increased in thickness, closing around them like a pall, almost shutting out the light of day. While groping about, my father had come into contact with the two beasts of burden which had served him in the easier parts of the ascent. They were quietly and unconcernedly browsing upon the sweet and tender shrubs which grew on the mountainside. Suddenly an idea came to my father. It was born of that desperation which makes a man think long and hard before laying down to die. It was thus he reasoned: if these animals are permitted to eat their fill whenever their appetites demand, they will be quite willing to stay where they are, especially when they find themselves surrounded by such excellent pastures, and in addition thereto, quite relieved from all toil. Let them, however, feel the pangs of hunger, or better yet, starvation's tooth, at their vitals, and their thoughts will at once revert to their homes, their masters, their feeding troughs, and they will lose no time in setting out for the village where they belong. With the energy of despair, my father hurriedly bound a piece of canvas over their mouths, so that they could neither graze nor drink, and awaited the result of his experiments with bated breath. For the tears and groans of my poor mother, whose strength was fast ebbing away, smote him to the very soul. After a few hours the animals rose to their feet and became very restive, and in another hour their hunger had so increased that they were making frantic efforts to feed, as my father could easily tell from the jerking of the line which he had been careful to attach to their headstalls. After the fourth hour there came a long silence, during which the animals seemed to be deliberating as to what course they should pursue. The fifth hour came. My mother had sunk to rest, weak and weary, in my father's arms. Suddenly there was a tightening of the guiding lines. Gently my father aroused his sleeping mate, whispering a few words of comfort. Again the lines tightened. My parents were now on their feet, peering into the depths of the impenetrable fog which shrouded them about and made them even invisible to each other. St- the animals move again, with a sudden impulse, as if their minds had at last solved the problem which had been bewildering them for several hours. The beasts, with violent snortings, turned from the spot, pushing through the shrubbery, causing my parents to face quite about. Evidently there was a complete accord between the conclusions reached by their intelligence or instinct, for not once did they pull apart or come to a halt, except when restrained by my father. And thus my dear parents were saved. All that day and part of the next did they pursue their dreary way. The fog at last lifted, and it was at once apparent to my father that although the animals were guiding them towards human habitations, yet it was not the land that he had quitted upon starting out upon the journey to the mountain peak. The path now became so plainly visible that my father removed the improvised muzzles from the two animals and allowed them to satisfy their hunger, which they proceeded to do with the keenest of relish. So worn out was my mother that she sank helpless to the ground. Refreshing her with a draught of spring water and the juice of some wild grapes, my father hastily prepared a bed of soft foliage, upon which they were both glad to throw themselves after their long and weary tramp. Wow, that's really beautiful. They had soon fallen into a deep and most delightful sleep. How long they lay on their leafy bed, wrapped in their refreshing slumber, they knew not. It was certainly for many a long hour, for when they awoke a hunger was gnawing at their stomachs. Fain would they have, I'm not sure what fain means, but I'm just going to say it. Fain would they have at once proceeded to gather fruit, had not their ears been suddenly saluted with the most extraordinary of noises. They rubbed their eyes and looked about at each other, deeming themselves the sport of some merry jack-a-dreamer. But no, they were wide awake, and in full possession of their senses. Again the strange sounds are heard, and this time they are nearer and clearer. There is a rise and a fall, a swelling out and then a dying away. The sounds are jerky and snappy, like there is a singular music in them. Nearer and still nearer they come. Louder and still louder they grow. "Wild beasts?" whispered my mother, half inquiringly. "Nay," falls from my father's lips, "not unless human beings may be so wild as to merit the name of beasts." "Hark again," murmured my mother. There was no mistaking the sounds any longer, for like a chorus of many voices, shrill and piping, deep and grumbling, soft and musical, harsh and guttural, yet in all a sort of rude and wild harmony, mingling in one mighty strain, now low and scarcely audible, and now breaking out with a fierce and seemingly threatening vigor. The singers, chanters, howlers, or whatever they might be, rushed into the valley below us in a wild and yet half regulated disorder. They were human beings in savage garb, with painted faces and clubs swung lightly across their shoulders. Whether pausing or advancing, they still kept up their wild and mysterious chant, choppy, jerky, and snappy, for all the world like 1,000 people who had just drawn plentifully from 1,000 snuff-boxes. "Save me, my husband!" cried my mother with a pallid face. "We shall be put to some awful torture by these wild children of the forest." A smile so gentle and yet so calm that it could not fail to be reassuring spread over my father's features. "Never fear," he said. "I know them. I've been seeking them. What has been denied many a traveler stronger and bolder than I, has been accorded to a member of the Trump family in the most miraculous manner. When we return to Europe, every monarch, every learned society, will hasten to bind a medal on my breast, for, dear wife, your husband is the first white man to enter the land of, and dot dot the echoed my mother, leaning forward and grasping her husband's arm. "Melodious sneezers!" "Melodious sneezers?" repeated my wife, with wide open eyes, and amusement seated in every feature. Meh, but she could get no further. To my father's infinite amusement, she fell a sneezing most violently. In such a rapid succession did the sneezers flow, that it sounded exactly like a diminutive engine under full headway. At last the fit seemed to have passed. Mellow, but in vain, she could not reach the second syllable. And now, in his turn, my father started off, slow at first, but going faster and faster. Strange to say, their sneezing soon began to catch the ways of the country and blended thoroughly, keeping time, in spite of their efforts to check it. "Know then, dear wife," cried my father pantingly when his fit was over, "that those strange people stretched on the greensward below are the melodious sneezers; that they are not only perfectly harmless, but gentle, kind, and peaceable to an astonishing degree. Fear them not. Their clubs are only for game." "But why?" asked my mother, warily, lest another fit should take her. "I understand thee," was the reply. "Listen. Know that in this valley and in the greater ones below, the air is always filled with myriads upon myriads of insects of infinitesimal size. Only the strongest microscopes can give proof to your sight of their actual existence. For countless generations, these peaceable barbarians here have been subjected to the tickling sensations which you and I have. Again my poor parents fell a sneezing in a regular and musical cadence, up and down, deep and shrill, now fast and faster, now slow and slower, until silence reigned again. Just experienced, resumed my father, until it has rendered the effort of sneezing quite easy as breathing, and taking advantage of results which they soon discerned could not be avoided. These children of nature were not slow to lay aside their usual speech and literally talk by sneezes. With them, a sneeze is capable of so many intonations, so many inflections, that they find no difficulty in expressing all the necessary feelings and sensations, at least necessary for them in their simple lives, as you shall see later on. And I believe it's almost time for the break. Let me just see the next little bit here. Oh, I've got one more page. Fain would my poor mother here express her passing wonder, but she dare not open her mouth. Come, dearest mate, cried my father gaily, courage! Let us descend into this beautiful valley, for as we yet are only standing upon the borders of the land of the melodious sneezers, called in their soft and musical tongue La Chula. I wish I was making this up. It really does say that. The pronunciation of this word again threw my poor parents into a perfect whirlwind of sneezes, but nothing daunted, they advanced to meet the natives, who at first sight fell prostrate on their faces, and for several minutes kept up a low, plaintive hum of sneezing, with their noses thrust into the grass. By degrees, however, my father succeeded in convincing them that he was quite as peaceably inclined as they were. Whereupon the melodious sneezers performed a most singular and withal pleasing dance of joy, their feet keeping perfect time with the chorus of sneezing. As my father afterwards learned, the dance was to express their intense gratitude to the white spirits for not having eaten them alive. The march homeward was now entered upon, my father walking hand in hand with the king Chuchulo, and my mother escorted by a score or more of his wives, the favorite of the royal house being named Chulaa, and each successive one according as she occupied a less lofty place in the king's affections, having a shorter name, until at last Chula signified little better than a mere serving maid. My father found that the villages of the melodious sneezers, on account of the frequency and violence of inundations from the networks of rivers which completely shut in their land, consisted of houses or habitations built in the trees upon lofty piles. He and my mother were lodged in one of the most commodious of the royal dwellings, and so many slaves and attendants were assigned to care for their wants, that there were little or no room to move about. To their great sorrow, my father proceeded to dismiss several hundred in order that he might get close enough to my mother to converse without hollering, and then sent word to King Chuchulo that both he and my mother would need at least a week of perfect rest and quiet to regain their health and strength after their terrible sufferings on the mountain slopes of the Mountain of the Moon. All right, time for a break, and I'll be back in about 4 minutes.
Welcome to Crystal Cove and Mystic Charms, where magic meets the mundane and the extraordinary becomes everyday. Are you ready to gift yourself with the whispers of ancient power stones? To feel and hear the echoes of our ancient past? Dive into a world where each pendant tells a story, where rare stones hold secrets known only to the universe itself. At Crystal Cove, our collection isn't just jewelry. It's a gateway to a realm of mysticism and wonder. Let the shimmering opal guide you through twilight dreams, or embrace the fiery energy of the sun with our exquisite amber pendants. Each piece, handcrafted by the hands of a true mystic who understand the language of the earth and the fire of one's heart. At Crystal Cove and Mystic Charms, we believe that every soul deserves to sparkle. Whether you seek solace in the calming embrace of amethyst or wish to dance with the vibrant hues of turquoise, our collection holds the key to unlocking your inner magic if you allow it to be so. Visit us today and discover the pendant that speaks to your soul. Crystal Cove and Mystic Charms, where the beauty of our amazing earthy realm meets the magic of the cosmos.
Hey there, Hunter. Go check out our friends at Colorado Custom Game Calls. They are all about creating a high-quality, custom, unique game calls at an affordable price. They are here for hunters that can't and won't pay upwards of $180 to $200 per game call. They pride themselves on giving their customers the opportunity to not only purchase an affordable and high-quality call, but to customize their game call to their liking. So listen up and go check them out. That's www.coloradocustomgamecalls.com. They got calls for all type of game, and all the game calls can be custom made to your own likeness. That's www.coloradocustomgamecalls.com. Tell them Matthew sent you from the Matrix Minds.
What is up, all my beautiful and gorgeous souls? I am Michelle Espinosa, otherwise known as the Shaman, through the Matrix Mind Media. So tell me, how many times have you wished that you had that special power of prediction? You know, to know what was going to happen before it actually happened and took place. To have some power and control over that situation before things came flying at you out of left field. The thing is, you actually can have that power. You can be aware of what's coming. Tune in to Astrology TV with me for Breaking the Cage every Sunday evening at 10 p.m. Eastern on the Matrix Mind Media. And I will go through the astrology and help put you on the right course and get you back in control of your own life. Love you guys.
This CBD fluid is a whole flower fluid extracted from the cannabis flower. We don't use any heat, butane, or chemicals when we extract, so we get all of the components of the plant. All the CBD, CBG, CBA, all the terpenes, all the flavonoids. This allows our body to absorb at 60 to 90% rather than the average of 6 to 10% absorption you would get with a CBD oil. Because our bodies are made up of mostly water and this is a fluid, it's highly absorbable so that you're getting 500% more nutraceuticals per dose. We also have this available in our CBD spray as well as a muscle rub with all kinds of botanicals. You're going to absolutely love it.
Check it out, Brainiacs. MatrixMinds.live/CBD. The CBD I use. Feel free again. Feel alive again.
Welcome back to Just a Moment. My name is Kristen Harding, and again today I am reading the Barron Trump novels and The Last President. And we're already on chapter 3. My birth. Again, this is a synopsis of the chapter. So, my birth. The elder Baron reads my horoscope. The birth of Bulger. The elder Baron. The elder Baron puts on mud shoes and goes for a walk. What he discovers: my wonderful precocity, my love for Bulger, my terrible fall into the lake of mud. How the melodious sneezers in their mud shoes attempted to rescue me, their failure, Bulger comes to their assistance, how I was dug out and restored to my mother, remarkable effort of the warm mud on my head and brain, the melodious sneezers are afraid of me, my fondness for arithmetic and languages, our farewell to the melodious sneezers and return home, how I discharged my tutors, and how the elder Baron forced them to pay for the instruction that I had given them. At this point my hand trembles, and the ink flows unsteadily from my pen. I am about to record certain events which I feel assured the reader will agree with me in considering to be the most interesting of my strange and varied life. Possibly I should say interesting to me, for, gentle reader, one of these certain events above referred to is no less important occurrence than my birth into this grand and beautiful world, a world which has proven to be full of wonderful things and of more wonderful beings, and you shall see as I go on with my story. I was born in midsummer. It was the night season. 10,000 stars twinkled over the cradle of that wretched little helpless lump of clay, but brighter than all, like a crimson torch flaming in the skies, Sirius the dog star shone down upon me. My father looked up at the heavens and smiling murmured, "Little stranger, thou shalt ever be a lover of dogs. Thy smile shall be joy to them, thy words music, and in some four-footed beast of their race shalt thou find thy best and thy faithfulest, truest friend." As if to set the very stamp of truth upon his father's words, at that very instant a cry of a mother dog was heard in the adjoining room, and one of the royal household's chulala came running into my presence with a basket of tiny puppies. My father laughingly seized the wicker cradle of this newly arrived family, and holding it up to me, cried out, "Choose, little baron, choose thee a friend and companion." I put out my tiny baby hand, and it rested upon one with a particularly large head. "Ha, ha!" laughed my father, "thou hast well chosen, little baron, for him thou hast chosen hath so much brain that his head doth fairly bulge with it." And when my infant tongue came to wrestle out that word, it was twisted into Bulger. And thus it was that Bulger and I started out life's journey at almost the same moment. Upon the following day, my father made the discovery that the waters had begun to recede in the night, and as he looked down from our lofty dwelling, he saw that it now stood apparently in the center of a quite extensive island. After breakfast, in accordance with the custom of the country, my father put on a pair of Chuchulo's wooden shoes, and were worn by all of the melodious sneezers when attempting to move about on the surface of the soft mud occasioned by the inundation. These wooden shoes are extremely light, although quite as long and as broad as snowshoes. The soles being polished, the wearer is enabled to glide over the mud, from the nature of the soil is very, very oily, with the same rapidity as a runner upon snowshoes. After an incursion of several hours up hill and down dale, my father returned with this piece of strange intelligence, namely, that their habitation had undoubtedly, prior to the falling of the waters, been situated in a lake, but that by degrees, as the waters receded, an island had been formed, which, let me get this right here, which somewhat later had been transformed into a peninsula, which in its turn by a still further sinking of the waters had been changed into the crown of a mountain, which with gently sloping sides, so that, as he reported to my mother to his dying day, it would be impossible for him to say whether his son had been born in a lake, on an island, upon a peninsula, or a mountain top, a fact which pained him extremely, for, like all members of his family, he took the greatest pride in recording important details and events with scrupulous exactitude, even to the smallest detail. Unlike most babes who seem content to pass the first half year or so of their lives just eating, sleeping, and crying, I from the very outset displayed a most astonishing precocity. When only a few weeks old, although I could not talk, yet I had learned to whistle for Bulger, whose development in my mind and body seemed to keep even pace with mine, and who passed most of his time looking up into my childish face with an expression which meant only too plainly, "Oh, I shall be so glad when that little tongue is unloosed so that you may call me Bulger and bid me to do your will." Nor had he long to wait. The one thing which at this early period of my life gave me most joy was the sunlight. Within doors I was fretful, peevish, irritable, but once out in the open air my whole nature changed. I drank in the soft, balmy atmosphere with a vigor and a satisfaction that delighted my father. My face brightened, my eyes traveled from valley to hill, from mountain top to sky. Into such an ecstasy of pleasure did the sight of the great world throw me, that my mother became anxious lest it presaged some great evil that was to happen upon me. But the stately baron only smiled. "Fear nothing, wife. It only means that within the little head dwells a most wonderfully active mind for a child of its months." Whenever Bulger heard his little master crying out in the joyful tones at the sight of the beautiful world, he was sure to be seized with a fit of violent barkings, during which he sprang around about me with the wildest and most extravagant manifestation of sympathy. Sympathy. Without a doubt, there was a wonderful bond of affection between us. To my mother, I had almost said I. To my mother's I had almost said horror, I one day, while she was walking with me in her arms upon the broad veranda which encircled Chuchulo's palaces, attempted to throw myself from her arms, crying out in German, "Los, los!" meaning "Let me go, let me go." I was but 2 months old, and the loud and vigorous tone in which I pronounced the first word I had spoken in my mother's tongue fairly startled her. I had once, up until that time, apparently been more interested in the soft and musical languages of my royal nurse as well, Chula, in which I could make myself understood very easily. About this time an accident happened to me, which, although it did not bring about, it greatly hastened the release from parently per, parently restraint, so ardently desired both by Bulger and me. For my very entrance into this world something told me that I should be a famous child. Not a mere precocious youth, who is made use of by his parents at social gatherings to bore people already in poor spirits, by mounting upon chair or table and declaiming verses, parrot-like, with half a dozen woodeny, jerky gestures, but a genuine hero, a real traveller, not afraid to brave a tempest, face a wild beast, or bully a barbarous people into doing as he wanted them to do. It was my mother's custom in the cool of the day to sit with me on the broad veranda while she darned my father's stockings, for although of gentle birth, she had been so accustomed when a girl to exercise German thrift in all things, that even now, though she had become the wife to a real baron, she could not forego the pleasure of doing things in those good old ways, and thus she saved my father many a finning which the good man bestowed upon the worthy poor, and went down to the grave loaded with their blessings. That's beautiful. At such a time it was as a sudden fit of sneezing seized my mother, and to her unspeakable horror she let me slip from her arms. Down, down I fell, striking in the soft mud and disappearing from sight. The poor woman dropped like lead to the floor. The stately baron rose to his feet, and the color fled from his manly cheeks. But Chuchula, who fortunately was paying a visit to my father, only smiled. "Unfeeling barbarian," rolled the word the great baron, "hast no respect for a father's tears, a mother's anguish? Out upon thee! Would to heaven I had never entered thy domain." Chuchula spake not a word, turning with imperious mien and right royal manner towards a crowd of retainers he waved his hands. Quicker than thought the band of melodious sneezers sprang to their wooden shoes. Away, away they darted like black bats on the wing. The Baron saw that in his terrible grief he had let his better judgment slip away, and with pallid face and bended head stood supporting the fainting form of his wife. He felt, he knew, that his presence among the melodious sneezers at that moment would only disconcert them, impede their progress, and possibly so confuse them that all their efforts might be in vain. They from their childhood were so accustomed to wear those huge wooden shoes, to move about the surface of this treacherous mud, that if it were possible for human hands to restore to his son to his arms, theirs would do it. And so he spoke a few words of encouragement in my mother's ear, and continued to stand like a statue, with his gaze riveted upon the long files of melodious sneezers as they wound around the crest of the mountain to gain to the spot where, as they judged, I had disappeared. Armed with their light, broad wooden shovels, their dusky arms rose and fell with wonderful precision and regularity, keeping time with the musical notes of their sneezing, now soft and low, now breaking out in a wild and galloping measure. Down, 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 and yet they delved in vain. No sign of me was there to gladden the hearts of my poor grief-stricken parents. But hark! What is that shrill cry? It's not human. No, for it's Bulger's bark, or rather it was Bulger's yelp. He had been watching the band of melodious sneezers as their white shovels rose and fell all in vain, with his head thrust through the railings of the veranda. No one was there with mind and heart enough to catch the meaning of that poor yelp. Chuchula saw that his men were standing leaning on their shovels, with looks of doubt and hesitation in their eyes. The king was silent. It was the great baron who spoke. Oh, let them not give over. My life, my wealth, my health, my all are thine, good, kind Chuchula. A fit of sneezing cut short his appeal. Again Bulger's cry was raised, and this time the king heeded it. An attendant saw the royal nod, and hastening to bind broad wooden cups upon the dog's feet, he was turned loose upon the surface of the mud. What is man with his boasted intelligence? They were 10 paces or more distant from the point where I had disappeared. Yelping, barking, and whining by turns, my dear Bulger hurried to the spot where his unerring scent told him that his beloved little master had gone down. Again the band of melodious sneezers set to work with renewed vigor, while their white shovels flashing with strange effect against the inky blackness of the mud. Bulger encouraged them with loud and joyful barkings. Suddenly a clear, ringing, melodious "choo" rent the air. They had caught sight of me. With rare foresight for one of my months, I had closed my nostrils with one hand before reaching the mud, and thus saved my lungs from filling up. But how useless would have been this precaution had not my faithful Bulger come to my rescue. His joy now knew no bounds. I thought that I caught a glimpse of a smile on the Baron's tear-stained cheek as his boy was borne to the veranda, more like an animated lump of earth than aught else, for the air had revived me. My eyes were not only wide open, but they were the only clean place on my whole body. Utterly regardless of my filthy condition, my fond mother clasped me convulsively to her breast, and I verily believe that she would have pressed her lips upon my mud-covered head and face had she not seen the Baron's broad palm held in suspicious proximity while her mother's heart was emptying itself out in words. A few basins of warm water, and I was myself again. No, I was never myself again. My bath in the warm mud of La Achula effected a most remarkable change in me. It checked the growth of my body and turned all my strength upwards into my head and brain. In one short month, my head almost doubled in size. My baby face and expression were gone, and ere another moon had filled her horns, I had grown to be a living wonder. Not only was the size of my head something remarkable, but from my eyes beamed an astonishing intelligence. The poor women of La Achula land crouched in front of me as if I were a being from another world, and then tapping their foreheads, they approached my mother and whispered, "Most gracious Chu La the Great Spirit has made a mistake and put two souls in there instead of one." And then they bent their graceful bodies till their foreheads touched my mother's feet, and withdrew, going out backwards, like the best regulated court ladies, each levelling her finger at me and opening wide her eyes as she disappeared through the door. The whole scene was so grotesque that I burst out in a shout of laughter. Upon hearing which, the poor creatures tumbled headlong over each other in their mad efforts to get outside of the house, shrieking at the top of their voices, save us, he will bewitch us." "Little Baron," said my father, in a tone of mock anger, "you should not have frightened the ladies of King Chu Chu Lo's court." "Chupa, chupa, idiots," I replied, looking up from my slate, upon which I was working out an example in arithmetic, for I was very fond of figures. In fact, my father had already taught me addition by showing me how to trade off worthless glass beads for valuable ivory, and division by taking away 90 cents from every dollar I made. Long before I could read or write, I knew the letters of several languages by name, and could spell any word which had no silent letter in it. No one took more delight in my wonderful accomplishments than Bulger. He seemed to know instinctively that his little master was no ordinary being, and respected him accordingly. We now bade adieu to the land of La Chula and the melodious sneezers. King Chuchulo, with a mighty band of retainers, accompanied us to his frontier, making the forests resound with their melodious choo-chooing. Standing on the old baron's shoulders, I waved at them one last good-bye, to which they answered with such perfect whirlwind of choo-chooas that Bulger fairly howled with delight. Any special honor paid to his master was always a personal matter to him. The elder baron had intended to penetrate still further into the heart of Africa, but the fact is that the continental growth of my mind was so wonderful that it engrossed his attention from morn till night. He endeavored to hide this from me, but all to no purpose. Before I was 2 years old, my brain had grown so heavy that my mother was obliged to sew pieces of lead in the soles of my shoes to keep me right and upward. And yet, in spite of this precaution, I was often found standing upon my head, working out difficult mathematical problems by making use of my toes, as the Chinese do their counting machines. The first thing which my father did upon reaching home was to take me to a phrenologist in order to have a chart made of my head. The examination lasted a month. At length, upon the completion of the chart, it was found that I possessed 32 distinct bumps, well developed ones too. It was, therefore, at once determined to engage 32 learned tutors, each tutor to have charge of a separate bump, and to do this utmost to enlarge it, even if it grew to be a horn. My father was resolved to leave nothing undone in order to develop my mental powers to the utmost limit, and I said nothing for or either against the scheme. In one short year I had learned all the 32 tutors could teach me. What is more, I had taught each one of them 50 things which they had not known before, and which I had learned while traveling in the foreign lands with my parents. One fine morning, to the great surprise of my 32 tutors, I discharged the whole of them. The elder baron, at my suggestion, now sent a bill to each tutor for services rendered to him by me. Each tutor refused to pay. The elder baron, at my suggestion, now caused legal process to be served upon each one of them. The court, upon hearing my testimony, rendered an opinion which covered 5,000 pages of legal cap paper and required a whole week to read, in which they held that each thing which I had taught to each one of my 32 tutors was so remarkably strange and peculiar that in the eyes of the law it was worth at least $100. That made the bill of each tutor amount to $5,000, or $160,000 in all. The court then adjourned for a year, all three judges being so worn out mentally and physically as to need 12 months' rest before taking up any other business. And we are at the top of the hour. Wow, that went so fast. We're going to start again with chapter 4 the next time I don't have a guest. I hope you enjoyed that because I thought that was really interesting. And yes, it's a comedy. Oh my goodness, look at these people. Hello, hello. So, hello, David. Hello, Carol Ann. Let's see, David Nash says, I'll just chill and listen. Thank you. And he says, it is a comedy. Yes, it very definitely is. Yeah, it's a story. It's a story from like I said, 1899. And you can tell it just by how beautifully it's written. We certainly don't use these colorful words in our vocabulary every day now, do we? So Carolyn says, okay, so Tammy, okay. Have you seen the Baron Tesla likeness? No, but I'd love to. And David Nash says, lots of comedy. Well, yeah, one would hope. Maybe a little late and a little bright in this in these days of uncertainty. Let's just say that wouldn't be amiss. So that is all for now, my friends. Thank you so much for joining us. Never forget that you are amazing. You are loved. Be well, be safe out there, and I'll see you on the next show. Bye.